Hi, welcome to our roundtable discussion on a preaching series that was here at Burwood Church. We've got a panel of people ready to talk about their preaching, so we'll have them introduced. But before we start, my name's Josh. I'll be your compere along with Tony Knight here beside me.
Well, I'd like to introduce our panel for this discussion time. On my left, your right, is Diane Stick. Diane is a secondary teacher, and she specialises in, if my notes are correct, text and traditions and English as well.
They're correct.
Welcome along. Thanks, Don. We also have Anthony Mitchell. Anthony Mitchell's a businessman, runs a consultancy in business systems, I think it was. Over here we have Kylie Rowe, who's also a secondary teacher. Kylie, you specialise in art and text and traditions as well?
Yeah.
That's right. And finally, Ewan Bradley. Thanks for joining us this afternoon,
Hi,
Ewan.
Tony.
Ewan's a secondary teacher as well, and he is a specialist, looking at my notes here, in English literature and history.
That's right.
Fabulous.
Nice to be here, thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, we look forward to an excellent discussion, so perhaps we should have a bit of a look-see and find out what our topic is for today.
So the first place that we want to start is around getting some context around this whole discussion. Why are we here? What are we talking about? We know we're talking about parables, but what we want to get some idea about is where did this preaching series come from? So Ewan, I believe you're a bit of the brainchild, so can you just explain to us about why this Lifesaver series? What is that? What does it mean? Where does it come from?
Well, the idea actually came from a stage design that we discovered on the website that we often go to get ideas for series at our church. And we saw one church had used a whole set of neon swimming rings as the backdrop to their stage. And while they were using that for a summer theme, when I saw that, I immediately got the idea of Lifesaver, that's a life preserver, something you would throw out to somebody in distress. And so that started to click with some ideas about where do we see life-saving moments, life-saving advice in Scripture. The very best places where we get that kind of life-saving advice is from Jesus in the parables. And so what began as just seeing a visual image of a stage design filtered down to eventually become the Lifesavers series, which is what we called this 4-week program, looking at a variety of parables that Jesus told, specifically ones, though, that had that life-saving dimension to them. I think when people think about Jesus all over the world, they have a very positive view of Jesus, and they see him as giving lots of warm and cuddly, fuzzy advice about how to live your life and be happy. And while at times that might be true, there are other occasions where Jesus quite clearly presents humanity with choices. He creates in his parables situations where he essentially says, this is a place where human beings can get it wrong. And if they actually get it wrong in this circumstance here, it actually has profound consequences, eternal consequences. And so he's talking in a number of his parables about life and death issues, reminding us that many of the decisions that we make do have very, very important consequences. And it is possible to forfeit eternity if you make a mistake in the areas that he's addressing. And so the parables that we selected to talk about over the 4 weeks were ones that specifically had Jesus presenting these kind of life and death scenarios to us, and demanding through the telling of the story that we make a decision. Because it's just that important.
So just on that, so 4 weeks equals 4 preachers. We've got 4 on the panel today. So Di, if I can just ask you, what was your parable? What was your topic?
So my parable was from Luke chapter 14, the parable of the Great Feast. And I focused on what we call the in-between time. So I looked at the man who had invited a big group of people to a feast, and all these people had been very excited and they'd said, yes, we're coming to this feast. But then as time went on, they became less and less interested and less and less excited about attending this feast. And so when the day of the feast arrived, they actually were not interested in coming. So I was really interested in, well, what happened? Why did this great group of people that were so excited to attend because they had RSVP'd and they were coming, why had they decided that they actually didn't really want to go when the day of the feast arrived?
Anthony, just by way of introduction as well, if you can give us your parable.
Okay, my parable was on the 10 virgins. 5 of them had prepared for the bridegroom to come, 5 of them had not prepared. And I guess the point of the parable is very simple. The bridegroom represents Christ. He is going to come and pick up his bride, which is representative of the church. And I guess the key point is some people will be ready for him when he returns. Some people will not be ready when he returns. And that's the essence of the story.
So already there's a common thread between just your 2 parables about being ready, expecting the feast or the bridegroom to return.
Yep.
We'll throw over here, Kylie. How does yours fit into that? What's your parable?
So the parable that I'm representing today is not a parable that I preached on. I probably just want to give that credit to Monica Capusi, who spoke about this parable. Excuse me, sorry, and did so really well. It's the story of the building your house on a rock and having your house built on a rock and not on the sand, and about how if you've built your house on a rock and you've dug deep and made a good foundation, then you will last when the storms come.
Okay, so you started this whole thing off by saying choices was a key theme. Choice, do you build your house on the rock? Choice, do you go to the wedding banquet? Choice, do you prepare your lamp? What about you?
Exactly, because you were saying just a moment ago that it's all about being ready, and of course being ready involves making choices. The people who are ready are those people who have made the wise choice. They have chosen to be prepared, chosen to be ready, and so it really all does come down to choices. And I think that's something that links all of our parables, is this whole idea of the importance of choice, knowing what the choices are and then making the right one. The parable that I looked at was in Luke chapter 12, and it was the story of the foolish farmer who has a surplus crop, and he's got this dilemma of knowing what to do with this crop, and he finally decides that the best thing to do is to knock down his existing barns, make even bigger ones to house the surplus, the aim being to keep it all for himself. And Jesus is obviously using this parable as a way of talking about issues of wealth and possessions, and why are we given those? What is the privilege? With privilege comes responsibility, and how do we use the resources that he gives us for positive purposes in the world, rather than retaining all of them for ourselves and assuming that everything we gain in life is purely for our consumption. The assumption that everything is for our consumption, that idea. And so again, it's about choices. This farmer was presented with the choice of what he does with his surplus. Does he pretty much spend it all on himself and have a great life, or does he use it for some other purpose? And it's that some other purpose that I wanted to focus on and communicate to the audience when I spoke.